Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
and I'm Stephen Park. And we are going to start our book, Pachinko, which has a very strong background. Like, as much as Korea plays into it, as much as the time of 1910 to 1933 for that first book of Pachinko plays into it. Like, all of these create that background of what we're looking at. But also, colonization plays a huge factor into this, right?
Especially because it's like the entire setting.
Right. And I mean, colonization is huge, massive, impossible to really break down and discuss and really make it sound in any way just digestible.
There's a lot to contextualize. There's lots of nuance and complexity, a lot of perspectives as well.
Right. But one thing that has come out from generations and years and just massive amounts of different types of colonization in different places is foods.
Yes, and the fusions from that.
Right. And I love food.
Same.
So, like, if we're looking at, like, Filipino cuisine, right? Like, we have pandesal, which came from, like, the Spanish invasion. We have pancit and chop suey, which was the Chinese influence in all of this. In Korea, there's a lot of Japanese influences within it. And so that's more of, like, the ramen, the udon, things like that.
And also Chinese for the jjajangmyeon.
The jjajangmyeon, right.
Yeah.
And then when we talk about, like, other foods that I really like banh mi, which I'm not going to say that correctly. Like, there's absolutely no way I'm going to pronounce that in the right way. But that comes from, like, the French-Vietnamese fusion.
Yeah.
So those are now staples of things that we eat. But more recently, we've started creating fusion, or not we maybe, but, like, chefs and people have been creating fusion foods.
Yeah.
And that looks more in the form of, like, sushi burritos, the kogi truck, which has, like, the Korean burritos and tacos associated with it.
Like the cronuts.
The cronuts, exactly. Other ones that are more widespread are, like, the Tex-Mex, so that's, like, all throughout, like, southern U.S.
Totally.
In Portland here, we have one that's called EEM, so EEM, which is, like, a Texas barbecue and Thai fusion. So, I don't know. I really enjoy all of these fusion-type foods. Maybe not every single one of them, but I think it's interesting the way that people are coming about this.
That's fair, and it also depends, and we've talked about this before, but it depends on how, at least for me, I'm not a chef, I don't know the industry very well, but when it comes to fusions, I also think it matters how the chef or the cooks or the restaurateur is honoring the heritages or the histories of those foods.
Like, I know with, like, the kogi truck, it was created in LA, which is so immersed in Mexican culture that it was, like, his Korean cooking was then just utilized within the world that he saw, which is more Americanized Mexican food, because burritos aren't, like, fully Mexican either.
No.
So I think he took those parts of him that created it.
Yeah.
I don't know where, like, cheeseburger dumplings come from, because that I've never tried one, but I don't think a cheeseburger dumpling would be great.
Right. Or, like, when I've seen sushi donuts, I'm like, I guess, but why not just make it into sushi?
Right. It's because it's Instagram worthy. It's for the gram.
That's fair, but also, like, again, it goes back to who are these people that are creating these quote-unquote fusions, if they truly are fusions, or are they just playing off of the looks, the aesthetic?
So, like, a fine line between fusion foods and appropriation of cultures.
Yeah.
Which is very hard to define. It's very hard to say someone's right versus another person's right or wrong.
Totally.
But one thing, if I could stop one thing right now, it's not even a food type. I just wish people would stop saying umami. Like, every single time I hear a description of something, I keep hearing umami.
Yeah.
And I know that's not a fusion food. I know that's not a food at all. But I'm so sick and tired of people just saying umami. Like, why can't you just say earthy or meaty or something? Why is it always umami? Like, everything is umami.
Well, I mean, it became a part of the taste, what do you call it? The taste
profiles.
Yeah, the tasting profiles.
Right. And, I mean, it was always there.
Yes.
Like, the Japanese, it's not like they suddenly discovered the word umami in like 2010 or something.
Well, they put a name to the flavor.
Right.
So the fact that it is the newest taste profile, people are more susceptible or more sensitive to it and want to keep it in the zeitgeist.
I just don't. Everything is described as umami.
That's fair. I totally get that. It's like now we've lost savory, now we've lost salty and sweet and sour and bitter. All of those taste profiles have now become a back burner flavor, and we're only focusing on the umami. I get it. I get the pet peeve.
Right. My ice cream has to be umami.
Imagine mushroom ice cream.
Anyways, so I don't know. Find out truly what food is whatever you want it to be. You find out whatever you enjoy, and as long as you're respectful of the culture that it comes from, and I think having awareness of the foods that you're eating is sometimes maybe the best thing. I really enjoy learning about foods and their origination, which is why I think all of these, I don't know what a better word for it, but foods that come from colonization or more currently more fusion foods, it's always interesting to find out their history and how they came about, because most of the foods that we enjoy now come from a very depressive state, like the Irish and their potatoes, Koreans and kimchi, like almost any pickled food comes from preservation of a harvest. So I always think it's really interesting. But anyways, I'm not going to recommend you the food that you eat, but Jamae will hit you with our recommendation for the week.
Our recommendation for the week is Taste the Nation, which is a Hulu series hosted by Padma Lakshmi. It's currently in its second season, where Padma takes viewers across the United States to honor and explore the rich and diverse communities who've shaped U.S. American food today. Padma created, executive produced, and hosts this series, and Padma Lakshmi is an Emmy-nominated producer, television host, food expert, and New York Times bestselling author. She's also an activist through her work as an American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, artist ambassador, as well as the co-founder of Endometriosis Foundation of America, or EndoFound. A little more about Taste the Nation. A couple of the episodes that we've enjoyed watching is season 1, episode 14, or the special holiday season episodes, when Padma celebrates the Lunar New Year with different people from LA's Koreatown, called K-Town Countdown. Another episode, which is newly released in season 2, is episode 6, called Ube in the Bay, or I'm pretty sure whoever named it meant it to sound like Ube in the Bay, but it's Ube. Anyway, where Padma talks to different Filipinos about the Filipino food in the Bay Area in San Francisco.
Yeah, and I love how this show, even though it's all focused within America, it highlights the different places and the different people that maybe not always started there, even though she has a couple episodes based on indigenous people.
Yes.
But she highlights the people that maybe have moved in, or like the communities that have now grown to create a presence and a culture in that area.
Definitely.
So it really just makes America seem like the place that is the land of diversity and the land of community that it was always sought out and presented as. But I think has also gotten lost within the madness of all the other historical stuff that's happened.
Right. And I think to add to that, it's more than just seems, but to put a more focused view on how diverse the U.S. American food is. And it's not just Italian food and European-centric food, but Asian in its full diaspora, like South Asian, East Asian, West Asian,
Right.
and Pacific Islanders as well. Right. So it's not just one or the other, but a very widespread diversity.
Right. So that's Taste the Nation on Hulu with Padma Lakshmi. 2 seasons out now, and I think the more people watch it, there's more viability to create a 3rd season.
Yes!
So that is our recommendation for the week. Okay, so we have started Pachinko.
And it's a big book separated by 3 different books within it.
Right. And we are reading book 1, and with our current read, which are pages 1 through 96.
Or chapters 1 through 11.
Right. We're still going to stay in book 1, which is Gohyang, which means hometown.
And it's focusing on the time between 1910 to 1933, so the early 20th century.
Right. So let's go into it. So this book focuses on several different characters very early on, especially in the first 2 chapters.
Yes.
And then it kind of sticks with who I think are going to be our main characters for the rest of the book.
Yes.
Yeah. So we start off with the parents, which I don't remember their name, but Hooni is the child of these 2 parents that own this house in Korea. It's based in Busan, which is the very far southeast corner of Korea.
Yes.
And the parents own this house. This house is also utilized as a space to rent out to other people. As in 1910, when Japan annexes Korea, the parents have to move into a smaller room, so they bring on even more residents.
Yes.
But this house has almost always been a place where they have brought in people to stay and live with to make sure that they're making rent or making money and things like that.
Right. It's essentially a place to keep shelter over people.
Right. And I think one of the things that always seems to stick around is shelter. Like, one of our basic needs are always shelter. So when Korea is annexed, you lose a lot of things that are owned by Koreans.
Right. Property is lost. Businesses are lost.
Right. But then the basic foundations then stick around, which is shelter, food, and things like that.
Yes.
So I think this creates the foundation for the parents having some amount of stability. And then we bring in Hooni, who is their child who has a couple of different, I guess, disabilities.
Yes. Hooni is born with a cleft palate and a twisted leg.
Yeah, I think that's what they say.
Yes.
I don't know if they ever go into it.
There's like no full details. We just know that this is something that he's born with.
Right.
And they don't ever get a chance to medically address it. It would be what I'm thinking of.
I'm pretty sure. And also 1910, I don't know how well the practices are in terms of medically addressing it.
And especially like Busan is very far from
Seoul and like the bigger cities.
Yes.
But the thing is, like, Hooni is described as this visually very early on.
Yes.
But the rest of his character and his role kind of negates any of his disability.
Well, not necessarily negates, but people look past his disability because of his character.
Right, but he also works harder than a lot of other people. Like, he moves things around. Like, a lot of the things that he does makes it so that none of the stuff that seems to be focused physically just on first glance can really, you can't judge him by any of those things.
Totally. Like, he doesn't make his disability an excuse to not do things.
Right. So then Hooni comes in as like the main character. It's talked about how his parents really love him.
Yes.
He's really smart. He's intelligent. He just seems like the almost perfect person, seemingly.
Yeah.
So as he turns 28 is when a matchmaker, I think he even said 2 weeks after he turns 28 is when a matchmaker comes to the house to try to set him up with someone.
Yes.
Which my first thought was 28 in 1910 seems old, no?
Right. Well, I mean, he's a man. And I think men between 20 to 30 and even 40, it's, at least in my perspective.
But I just feel like, maybe so, but I felt like a lot of people got married like 20s. Like, even in like mid 1900s or something, like, I feel like 28 was like, you were on your tail end, maybe?
That's Fair. I think also the fact that he's not traditionally handsome might have stopped the matchmaker from finding people or women that would be willing to marry Huni.
Which then comes into the matchmaker coming to his house, and it doesn't seem to really faze her.
Right.
Also, the mom just plays it super cool throughout this whole process. She's like
Totally.
cooking or cutting something up, and it's just
Yeah.
like shrugging everything up. And eventually, they find the match for Huni, which is Youngjin.
Yes, and Youngjin is described as a small and almost weak woman.
Right, very meek at least.
And like not as like compared to her sisters, not as strong-willed or physically strong as them.
Right. And I think the interesting thing that Minjin Lee included in all this was that Youngjin was used to seeing cleft palates because there were like 2 people in her village that also had it. So
Yeah.
when she saw Huni, it wasn't like a big deal. And it seemed like none of the marriage really bothered her.
Right.
Which then goes into their marriage. And I don't know, they don't really describe it very much besides their like childbearingness.
Like their attempts to bear children, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like they don't really go into the fact that like Huni and Youngjin like love each other. Like main thing they say is like, oh, it was a very quick wedding. Not very many people knew about it, but it wasn't like, I'm sure they did love each other, but there wasn't a whole lot of emphasis into that.
I think not at the beginning. I feel that the details were sprinkled in when they start talking about the child.
Right.
Since we're talking about the childbearing attempts, they do lose 2 children.
I think it was 3. I think they lost 3 children in total. Because the next one, the one that you're going to talk about, is actually their 4th child.
Gotcha. Definitely. So they've lost multiple children. And then Sunja, she's born without any deformities. She doesn't have a cleft palate.
Right.
Her appendages are all untwisted. Definitely didn't inherit any of her father's disabilities.
Right, which was one of their biggest fears.
Worries, yeah.
And I think with the other children that didn't make it, because they were born, they just didn't make it past a certain age.
And there were some that were miscarried.
Yeah, it's true. But the ones that were born, they did carry, like, the cleft palate, if I remember.
Or some kind of disease, yes.
Right. So Youngjin and Huni take over the house and all the caretaking and bringing in the people, doing all that stuff, because Huni's parents pass away, which they also claim to mention that Youngjin was so accepted into the family, so she never felt like she was outside of it, which I think then led for her to be able to take on this role as the caretaker of the house once Huni passes.
And that's when I think the details of Huni and Youngjin's marriage come out, because Sunja talks about how Huni was so loving to her, and then not only that, she notices how her mother leaned on Huni a lot.
Right.
And it's not just because she was physically weak, but because Huni was so well connected to the community, and so she was able to take care of the house because Huni was the one bringing in people.
Right.
And also, Youngjin, in her memories of Huni, talks about how after each lost child, Huni would just say, "It's okay, I'll take care of you, we'll try again."
Right. And I think the ghost of Huni will be throughout this book, at least from what it seems like with the first few chapters.
Right.
It seems like his presence is ever looming, which is kind of like what his presence was in the community, or the people that come into the house, they know Huni or have heard of Huni, or it seems like he carried such a big presence within that area.
Absolutely.
That everyone knew him
Right.
and respected him.
Right. And to the point that when they see Sunja, they remember Huni.
Right. Okay, so that's a lot of people.
But that's one family.
And that was like the first 2 chapters.
Yes.
Like, we haven't really even dove into the book yet. All in all, to say, the parents, I think, are completely out of the equation at this point. They were just kind of set up there to show who Huni was.
I feel like the parents and the grandparents, all this story was to build on who the child or Sunja is coming from, where she's coming from, what her history is, and why she is choosing the actions that she chooses to take in the future.
Right. Because, I mean, Youngjin is a pretty staple character within these next few chapters, at least to the points where we've read.
Right.
Huni passes, but once again, I think his presence will forever loom through the heart and the mind of Sunja.
Yes, and Youngjin.
And probably Youngjin.
Yeah.
I'm curious how much longer Youngjin stays in the story, which we'll get to at the end. So then let's create the setting of this world that is post-Huni, and we are with Youngjin and Sunja. Now, they're running the house, and currently everywhere in the world is in a Great Depression.
Yes.
So not a whole lot of money going around.
Right. So not only is Korea suffering under the annexation and the rule of Japan, but there's a Great Depression economic-wise and resource-wise.
Right. So in this house with them are several fishermen. There's 2 brothers and 1 other person.
Yes. So there are 2 sets of fishermen, but the ones that we're introduced to are brothers and 1 other man.
Yeah. And then there's 2 other caretakers of the house.
They're servants.
They're servants. And there's sisters?
Yes. They're orphaned. So they were taken in by Youngjin.
Yeah. So that's who we're going to be dealing with for the most part within this story, and until enter new characters.
Right.
So one of the bigger points that happens within the story that we read is when Pek Isak shows up. Now, who is Pek Isak?
So Pek Isak is a pastor, if I remember correctly. And he came from Seoul?
He came from somewhere up north.
Yes. And
somewhere rich, too. Like, where there was a lot of money.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the reason why he went to Busan is because his brother knew of this place, which is run by Youngjin now, and heard about Huni. So again, Huni's reputation is what's bringing people in, and it's what's bringing Isak to them.
Right. And I forget Isak's brother's name, but
Yosef,
because it was from the Bible.
Yes.
Which is what they said.
Yes.
But Yosef is now in Osaka. Now, the reason why that matters is because if you haven't had a chance to look up a map yet, Seoul, or like some of the more populated areas of Korea, at least I'm sure more so back then, are way up towards the northern side of South Korea.
Yes.
So within the whole of Korea, it's like central. Now, Busan, which is way on the southeast side, which is where this whole area is based, is closest to Japan, which is just off the southeast coast of Korea. Osaka is towards the southwest area of Japan. So for Isak, what he's probably thinking is he's coming down, going to spend a couple of nights, knows about this place, which Youngjin creates also for herself as a place that has really good food, even though it's pretty desperate and meager.
Right.
But he comes down here, is going to probably stay a couple nights, and then go down to meet his brother in Osaka.
Yes.
The issue is, this boy, who, if it was 2 years ago, would have been spreading COVID like crazy.
He's sickly, for one.
He's not just sickly, he has TB, tuberculosis.
Right.
Which is airborne.
Right.
Which means if you breathe or cough while infected, they will quarantine people into their own room with like positive pressure just to make sure that that air doesn't infect other people.
True.
And this kid just shows up in a house where all that's separating other people are like these paper doors.
Yes.
And is like, oh yeah, I had this. I thought I was okay. Yeah. So he shows up and he's pretty much dying right off the get-go.
Right. And he thought he was just tired.
Right. But, I mean, the thing is, Yangjin has practiced with this because Huni has also had to deal with this.
Yes.
So she has this back shed that she can then go take Isak to and
isolate him.
Right. And then start to be able to work with them. And luckily no one else gets sick. Yeah, everyone's somehow just fine. And
right.
We don't know what happens with him until later on. Right? But the way that this chapter kind of ends is with Sunja admitting to her mom that she's pregnant. And then it sets us back 6 months.
Right. And so that's what I appreciate about Minjin Lee's writing style, that every time there's a cliffhanger, the question is answered in the next chapter.
Right.
So anytime that there is a blank, what is happening?
Right.
We're given the reason and the answer right away.
Right.
There's no, I'm gonna hide this until the very end kind of energy.
Right. Like you bring up this massive thing of this 16-year-old girl, I think.
16, 17?
Yeah.
But she is young.
Really young.
Yeah.
Doesn't have a relationship as far as anyone's told us.
Right.
And then she's preggers.
Right. And it's like, who is it? Is it the fisherman? Is it somebody else that isn't mentioned yet?
Yeah, like if it's a game of Clue, we have nobody. Like, it's like the house is empty.
Right.
But in that next chapter, like you said, Minjin Lee shows us exactly who this person is. Even off of their initial meeting, it's pretty obvious and clear who this person's going to be.
Yeah.
Now, so Youngjin has to go to the market to go pick up food things, and because this is the fish market and the fisheries, right? And bring Sunja with her to go get the stuff done. This is where Sunja makes eye contact with Hansu.
As we get into this chapter, there are a few, I guess, content warnings to keep in mind. There is accounts of sexual harassment, and something that I think is happening is child abuse, in that he is super, super, super old.
Right, so let's talk about it.
Yeah.
So Hansu is
37.
34, I think.
He's in his 30s.
Because I think he's double the age of Sunja, which I think you're right. She is 17. So he is the head of the fishery person, so everyone kind of looks up to him. And,
right. He's very well-to-do, well-off.
Right. And he spends half of his time, maybe not half, but we know he spends
a lot of time.
Yeah, back in Osaka. And then he spends his time also in Busan.
Right.
He knows how to speak both Korean and Japanese because of his travels and his work.
Right. And he speaks so fluently that you can't really tell whether he's Korean or Japanese.
Right. And so this man, who is suited up like the person that you would think as very businessy, and especially in a time where everyone else is struggling to get by, like it means something if you're making that much money.
Right.
And he has eyes for Sunja.
Ugh.
It's very clear. Even some of the ladies that work the stands at the fisheries, they're like, what is he doing staring at her?
Right.
She's just a girl.
Right, like that's so inappropriate.
Right. And so it starts off as just looking. It eventually turns to him asking her one question every time before she leaves, and she just kind of like walks away. But the thing that eventually does it is Sunja goes and picks up some things. Then she's walking home to try to, just get back home. And then she's followed by, I think, 3 or 4 Japanese boys.
Well, we don't know if they're all boys, but we do know that they are students.
Right. It definitely sounded like they were boys. Something in the language or the writing made me picture 4, like, teenage, bratty boys. They're yelling at her in Japanese. They're talking about how she's insufficient because she's Korean. They are harassing her verbally, and then that harassment then turns into physical.
Right. So essentially just because Japan is the ruling power, they are essentially just talking down to her.
Right. It also just feels like teenage boy energy.
Ugh.
Middle school energy. So this is where some of that graphic detail does get in. But luckily for Sunja, somehow, out of nowhere,
Hansu shows up, the knight in shining armor.
The classic Disney story comes in and then pretty much tells these kids off in Japanese, tells them to never like visit there again, don't harass her. So yeah, very knight in shining armor.
Yes.
So technically, I guess he saves Sunja and then sends her on her way, and then she forgets to tell him thank you for doing that, which I think even that mentality while she's riding the boat back home creates this
like connection or this attachment.
Right. Or in terms of what you were saying earlier, this imbalance in power. This is where the story then develops into this blossoming relationship of Hansu and Sunja.
More like grooming. So throughout this, Hansu keeps finding different opportunities to meet. And every time they meet, he plants these ideas and thoughts into her mind and makes her feel like this is a relationship. So essentially just grooming this girl.
Also, I wanted to mention, there's a part where Hansu tells Sunja to call him Oppa, which he's 34 and 17. Now, for people that don't know Korean stuff very well, Oppa means older brother from a female perspective.
Yes.
So for Koreans, we call our older siblings different things. And so for a female to an older male, we call them Oppa. Now that's the literal term, which is used all the time, but there is another way of saying it, and Oppa is also a way of endearment to someone that you like. Like it's your way of being like, oh, honey, sugar. But what it sounds like in this scenario is like when Hansu is asking Sunja to call him Oppa, sounds like he's trying to make her call him daddy. I don't know. It's like when he said Oppa, I was like, the thing that came to my mind was like, call me daddy.
Which is the issue. And it's like he keeps building and building and building, and eventually, again, content warning, that's how she gets pregnant. Because he has his way with her. And like his idea of consent is, are you okay? And I'm like, no, that is not how you get consent.
I mean, he did. I mean, okay, yes, not consent, but he did ask, which is shocking. Like, just that in itself is shocking that he did that. But clearly, she like didn't enjoy the experience. She didn't even know what was going on. She was like,
she was in pain, and she's always in pain.
But she did it as a way of making him happy. Which was always the case with their relationship.
Which is not great. Which is just downright terrible.
And so this is how she gets pregnant. She's hiding it from everyone at this point because she's not in a relationship. And, you know, especially in the 1910, in a patriarchal society, she knows that it's not going to be good for her.
And beyond that, when she does tell Hansu that she's pregnant, that's when he finally reveals to her that he has a family, a full effing blown family in Osaka, and his way of trying to console her is, oh, but I'll take care of you. Oh, we can't get married, but it'll be okay. Let me give you money. And I'm like, no.
Well, it's okay. So, yes, this is where it's revealed that Hansu has had a family this whole time. We don't know the actual relationship with him and his wife and kids. Like, it sounds like he's unhappy as well, which is no excuse for any of this stuff. But from the aspect of what he wants to do for Sunja, it at least sounds like it's coming from a genuine place. Maybe not for that actual relationship, but he's also interested in if this will be a boy. Because the male heir or the genealogy continuing is such a big thing at this period.
True, but also that child's not going to take his name, so it doesn't matter.
But that's, I think, what he wanted. Because he was willing to house Sunja, her mom, was willing to buy the house that they're staying in. Like, he wanted to take care of them. And I think if it was a boy, it seems like it wouldn't have been, for lack of a better term, a bastard child. It seems like he would have taken care of all of them, maybe with the hopes that that child would carry his name forward.
Maybe, but I feel like that's such a big gamble, especially for Sunja and Youngjin.
Right.
If it's not a boy, will he stop taking care of her? And if
Right.
it is a boy, is he gonna not take care of his family?
Well, that's the thing we don't know, because he specifically mentions
Right.
that he doesn't have a boy. And that's why I think this is, I don't think it's even the thought of what if this is a girl.
Mm-hmm.
I think his only thought is, this is my chance to have a boy.
That's fair. I mean, like, I agree with your thought process, but what I'm saying is, like, either way, he's gonna lose.
Right. Which then leads us to what actually happens, which is Sunja is just so pissed
Yeah.
that
Absolutely.
he didn't tell her about the wife. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Before telling Hansu, she imagined having a life with him.
Yes.
And like going forward and having a wonderful family, maybe moving to a cycle. Like all these things are in her brain.
Yeah.
And then to be dropped a bombshell like that, she doesn't hear any words past the fact that he has a family.
Mm-hmm.
So then this puts Sunja in a terrible spot.
Yeah.
She's either going to be seen as this woman who is bearing a child from a non-husband, which
Right.
would put her in a really bad scenario with the rest of the
Yeah.
town.
Yes. Especially because they all know her. This is going to, like, bring a bad name to her father's reputation.
Right. Or she's going to take up this offer to just have money, and maybe that heals some of the wounds.
But she says no to it.
Right. But then, let's take it back. Because there's somebody lying in waiting.
Jesus.
So let's go back to the pastor who was dying with TB, and then all of a sudden is resurrected in his chambers.
Because of Youngjin and Sunja, like, Sunja is here risking her life with a child and growing in her body.
Yeah. And so he's alive. Like,
Yes.
he's healed, he's cured, whatever you want to say.
Right.
We don't know how long, because we don't know what TB means for him. Like, we don't know what
Right.
tuberculosis is going to mean for Isak.
Right.
But he wants to figure out a way to thank Sunja and Youngjin.
Yes. And his way, or his idea of thanking them, after hearing that Sunja is pregnant
Right.
and without support,
Right.
his idea of thanks is to marry Sunja, which I see value in that he's going to give a better life for both Sunja and her child. He's giving them a name.
Mm-hmm.
He's giving them protection. But what I find issue with is his reasoning, is because God told him, which to me is like weaponizing or rationalizing, however you want to see that. And I'm like, if you want to marry this person, just marry this person and say that you want to.
Right. So her choices are this man who also asks her to change her. Well, she doesn't really have a religion. Like she doesn't have a belief system.
no.
But asking her to then join in with his belief system, which makes
Right.
sense if he's a pastor. It kind of fits. Or you choose the guy who left the last conversation by accusing her of getting pregnant, quote unquote, because you couldn't marry a normal fellow.
Oh, dear Jesus.
So these are her two options.
They're not great.
But if we think of the time period and where this story comes from, the actual offer from Isak makes sense. And I mean, let's not only think about the time period, but let's then base it off of Youngjin's reaction, right? Because for me, I haven't lived in that era.
Right.
And so listening to the way that Youngjin not only accepts, but fully embraces and is so thankful for Isak for providing this opportunity,
Yeah.
that shows how important and how much sacrifice I think Isak actually provided. So if we look at it now, it seems terrible. I think if we look at it for what it is and for the time and what it would mean for a mother to birth a child without a father, I think this offer is more genuine than it is evil or malintent.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's malice from Isak. I just think that his reasoning is flawed. And the fact that he's trying to convert her without giving her guidance on how this conversion works, it feels a little misguided.
I mean, maybe. But once again, I think his heart's in the right place.
His heart's in the right place. His actual actions and reasoning might not be.
Okay. So there's a whole lot of other stuff with Sunja going to Isak's upper minister or something. He goes to like this church and asks him to wed the both of them, and
so that they can go to Osaka together.
Right. So there's some of that stuff which, I don't know, it was fine. It just seemed like it moved the story along, but it didn't seem like majorly important.
Fair.
So that stuff happens. Youngjin goes and finds white rice, which apparently is extremely hard to do in this time.
Well, because it's reserved for Japanese customers.
Right. Which now, like, white rice is like the staple. And like every other rice is more expensive.
Right.
And then we are at the point where Sunja is going to leave her home and join Isak on the trip
journey
to Osaka.
Yes.
As we're looking at that final scene, Youngjin is talking to Sunja and kind of gives her the conversation of being out on your own.
Which she kind of just lays on all of this wisdom all at once.
Right. This was like my sex talk with my dad, the second one when I was going to grad school.
Which I'm like, this would have been helpful if you told her this stuff earlier.
Right. But also, like, this moved by so quickly. Isak got better. Was like, let me marry your daughter. Let me go to this guy, see if he wants to marry us. It just seemed like it just, like, happened really quickly. So I don't know if there was really time and preparation to be like, I'm going to send my daughter off. Also, there's this ticking time bomb in her belly that's just going to, like, plop out in another 6 months. Or no, another 3 months. Because we're 6 months into the pregnancy. So I think it has to move quickly.
True. I just think that my send-off into adulthood, which was me moving into my own place, it kind of felt like, okay, these are the things you need to know. Okay, bye. And it's like, I wish you told me this when I was growing up.
Right. But also, I guess this is how you become independent. And I think...
By being blurted at.
Well, it's kind of like the mama bird that pushes the baby bird out the nest. And you have 20 feet to either fly or die.
Yeah, but the bird doesn't say anything to the bird. They just pushed them.
Yeah. It's survival. Okay, so we end chapter 11 with the goodbyes. And she's going to be on our trip.
Yes.
Now, 2 quotes that I thought were very interesting, and I'm curious what your thoughts were. So one is, quote unquote, be perfect, child. Every Korean must be on their best behavior over there. A couple ellipses. One bad Korean ruins it for thousands of others.
I feel that this quote, particularly in this time period, was necessary because of the political and the social atmosphere at the time. But I also think that this bleeds into many aspects of immigrant communities here in the United States.
That's exactly how I felt. Like, even though this was set in a completely different context, and especially for me, in the words of being Korean, being so literal, I mean, being in the U.S. was a completely different experience. And it felt like every new step, every life stage that I went to, these were the words that completely surrounded every action that I had to think about. So it was really interesting to read this quote and have this rush of flashbacks and waves.
Totally.
And it kind of even pulled me out of the story for a second until I had to, like, reintroduce myself back into it.
Totally. I feel like this sentiment applied to me differently in that growing up, rather than being reminded to be on my best behavior because I was always on my best behavior, it was more like, oh, look at that other person. That person is not on their best behavior. They are making us look bad. So Yes, absolutely. That followed me everywhere, like seeing examples that are being pointed out to me about whose bad behavior we're keeping track of so that we don't get that reflected on us.
Right. So another quote is, Hansu had said that Osaka was an enormous place where you'd hardly see the same person twice. Any thoughts on that?
I feel like that could apply to many cities.
So for me, I think this is Chekhov's gun. I think this is, because this is said by Sunja. And this is when Hansu, like, this is what Hansu said to her.
Yes.
I think
they're gonna meet.
Oh, absolutely.
Totally. I feel like multiple Chekhov's guns have been placed.
Yeah.
One being this quote, and then another being that Sunja keeps thinking about Hansu even though she said she's done with him.
Also, the necklace or the keepsake that her mom gives Sunja. And says, don't ever use this until you absolutely need to.
Right.
Pretty sure that's going to come into play.
And the fact that she still has the watch that Hansu gave her.
Yeah.
And her mom asking her, what are you going to do with it? Sunja's answer being, I'm going to sell it. Was like, in my mind, I'm like, this girl ain't going to do it.
I think that's the one I was thinking of. Yes. Okay, the last quote. And this is the very first line that Min Jin Lee provides to us. History has failed us, but no matter. I don't know. I felt like that as an opening line just meant so much, especially for the time period that we're entering.
Right.
It showed the desperation, the despair. It just set up a scenario without using any words to describe what it looked like.
Right. And it also kind of paints a picture of, well, we're just gonna let it be.
Right.
Like, even though everything sucks, we're still alive and we're still gonna live.
Right, which is kind of the mentality that Huni has, because he always says, it was a reference that Yangjin and Sunja always made of Huni saying, no matter, regardless of the war's outcome, the next day's chores still need to be done. It's kind of like, it's gotta happen.
Yeah, just gotta live.
Yep. Okay, so we're talking a little bit about the words, but we're giving predictions. What do you think is going to happen?
I feel like Hansu is going to show up already. Like, I don't think we're going to have to wait that long.
I feel like these chapters were great at introducing us to characters, and I think the way that Sunja's character was set up by showing us where she came from and where they came from really gave us a perspective of the humility, the person, the morality that was kind of not only maybe taught to her, but kind of infused in her through her genetics.
Totally.
So I love the way that it's set up, but at the same time, I don't even think we touched the meat yet. Like, this is kind of, for me, it's like the sandwich or the burger or, I don't know, like the calzone or something where you take that bite and all you get is bread. You don't get any of the contents yet.
Right.
So I'm waiting for the contents.
I also feel like Sunja has been set up for failure. Like, even though she chose well for herself, again, although Isak's intentions are great, Hansu is in Osaka. They're both going to Osaka. And because of the times, they're Koreans going to Japan. I think things are gonna get worse.
Right.
Not just for both of them, but for Sunja specifically.
Right. Well, let's talk about our next read then. So, what are we gonna read?
For those who are following along on the physical book, pages 97 to 197, which is book 1, chapters 12 to 17, and then it takes us to book 2, chapters 1 through 5.
Right. So we'll be reading along with all of that.
Yes.
But if you have any questions, comments, or have any interest in reaching out to us, how can people do so?
You can reach out to us through email at asianbookclubpod@gmail.com or on Instagram at asianbookclubpod.
Right. And we also have our website, which is asianbookclubpod.com. It also has our bookshop on there, so you can find our current recommendations or books that we've already read. Other than that, follow, like, subscribe.
Yes.
Do all the things that you do to help podcasts get promoted.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure this book is going to get good, but I'll make sure that we tell you about it next time.
Bye.
Bye.